Welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Executive Coach Nicole-Renee, a relationship specialist and self love promoter. The topic for today is COVID couples corruption. I chose this topic based on the fact that many couples' relationships were corrupted in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. Divorce and domestic violence was at an all time high. The divorce rate was 34% higher due to the pandemic because COVID came to interrupt some stuff. Yes, it did. It opened up a world and brought everything to the surface. We have been brewing things in our homes for weeks, for months, for even years. But when COVID arrived to the scene, it brought everything to the surface. It forced us to discover some things about ourselves, about our children, and ultimately about our spouses. Let's take a closer look at how much time do we utilize to engage with other people, because we love to interact. Yet, we don't take the time to invest and engage with ourselves, which is the underlying root to why a lot of the relationships did not survive the pandemic. This is why many of us have not made it through, because we don't know who we are, we don't know who we married, and we definitely don't know who we're dating. That is the truth of the matter. We got into these relationships with the wrong person, for the wrong reason, at the wrong time. We're sleeping with strangers and connected to counterfeits because we got engaged and caught up creating these relationships that were unhealthy and unfulfilled, mainly because we didn't deal with the fundamentals, which is the foundation concerning self. COVID has brought to the surface many triggers fueled by childhood wounds, rejection, abandonment, fear, insecurities, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. We got to pay attention to the signs, people. Some families needed to go through this to be shaken up, to address the mess. Because a lot of us, we've been living a lie. And baby, COVID came to clean up the clutter. Yes, it did. We are quick to complain and redirect blame instead of really dealing with ourselves internally. Who are you? I didn't ask you, what do you do? I asked you, who are you? What are the characteristics that define who you are? We face ourselves every day. We spend more time with ourselves than we do with anybody else in the world, yet we don't know who we are. We're more interested in getting to know other people, getting into these relationships, when clearly we get in them under false pretenses because we're not being our authentic self. We're sending our representative, we're wearing our mask, and then we end up becoming the person that we think the other person desires us to be, and not our authentic self. We try to merge two worlds as one when we're not clear or sure of the world in which we came from. We got to know and do better. We get into these relationships and we come to find out, we really don't know our partner in depth. And the reason why we don't know our partner in depth, because we don't know ourselves in depth. Relationships are superficial. They're surface. We were accustomed to spending a few hours with our boo in the morning, in the evenings, till when COVID hit, we was with them jokers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We learned real quick that, maybe we're not that compatible. Anything that we used to ignore was now facing us straight in the eye. Some of y'all felt like y'all was smothered, felt like y'all could not escape. And then you want to ask yourself the question, how did I get here? I'm going to tell you how you got here. You got here because you weren't being honest with yourself. You didn't take the necessary time to invest in yourself, which is really, really important. Because when you don't invest in yourself, you end up compromising, your vision becomes clouded, you start making decisions based on emotion and not dealing with your authentic self. When COVID came, it brought everything to the surface. Everything to the surface. I encourage you, if you were going through stuff, tap into your resources. Tap into getting coaching, getting a therapist. I'm an executive coach, and even I have a coach. Many of us were brought up in dysfunctional households. We can't ignore the inevitable. We got to put in the work. We need to meditate, establish a relationship with God, do prayer and devotion. You need to exercise. You need to eat well. You need to feed your spirit, your mind, your body, all of it. It's important. Speak words of affirmation over your life. You know, I love God because He designed men and women very uniquely. We're wired very uniquely. We think, we speak, and we act very differently, which is a plus. God designed men to be logically centered. They have an emotional side, but they're logically centered, while we as women are emotionally centered with a logical side, but we're centered emotionally. And I want women to be clear, just because we're emotionally centered does not indicate any display of weakness. Men, they think. When they express themselves, they do it based on what they're thinking. When women express themselves, they do it based on what they're feeling. Men are usually led by their mind, while we're led by our heart. They thrive by what they see, and we as women, we thrive by what we hear. We look at the world with very two different perspectives, both mentally and emotionally. We're very different, but we complement each other. God designed us that way. Several relationships did not survive the pandemic because we entered into them on false pretenses, on a rocky foundation. No one wants to embrace their contribution to the corruption, but it takes two to tango. When you met your partner, I asked the question, were you happily in your singleness? Were you fulfilled in your singleness? Because if your answer is no, then I'll tell you that you weren't ready for a couple's connection. Because happiness comes from within. That's an internal walk. You can't rely on someone else to help you fulfill that part of your journey. You got to know that there are so many people jumping through hoops for those who have not even earned the position that we've given them in our life. And I always try to tell people, never, and I mean never, allow someone to be your priority while allowing yourself to be their option. You got to get to a place that when you know your value, you don't have to explain your price. You got to be very clear about that. Many people desire this thing called love, but they lack the understanding that before you can simply love anybody else, you got to love yourself. Because when you don't love yourself, you end up sacrificing your feelings and your standards for a so-called relationship/friendship, and you end up very disappointed in the end. Loving self is very important. It's the quality of our relationships, both personally, socially, and professionally. You got to get to a point where you embrace who you are. There are many people among us that claim that they love themselves. But honey, it's more to this thing than treating yourself to dinner, to a spa, and to a getaway. Self-love consists of self-awareness, self-assurance, self-care, self-discovery, self-discipline, self-forgiveness, self-investing, self-identity, self-reflection, self-respect, self-value, self-worth. That's what self-love is. Don't ever mistake in that. You got to get to the core. We end up investing so much time building houses on foundations that are not solid, only to wonder why the house sank. You got to look and know how you're building the foundation. There's a scripture, Deuteronomy chapter 24:5. You might have never heard it, but I'm going to bring it to the forefront today. When a man has taken a new wife, He shall not go out to war, neither shall he be charged with any business, but he shall be free at home for 1 year, and should cheer up his wife, which he has taken. Now, do you think if many of us followed that, would we have a high divorce rate? Now, I know some of you are thinking, but if I followed that scripture to a T, I'd have been homeless, I'd have been hungry, and I would have been very unhappy. But I want you to focus in on the message. God designed that thing for us to invest quality time, not surface, but depth. Quality time in our spouses. Can you imagine dedicating 1 full year with no interruption of the children, no interruption of the jobs, no interruption of the outside world? It is his responsibility to cheer you up for the entire year. You will learn the ins, the outs, everything about that individual to the point where you are merged as one. And that's how God designed it. We were supposed to merge from 2 worlds into one. But nowadays, people are not putting in the time. They're not putting in the work because they didn't first start with themselves. Because before you can even remotely entertain a relationship with somebody else, you got to deal with you. You got to love you. You got to get to a place that you can embrace every aspect of who you are. You got to. It's important. It's vitally, vitally important. Because when you don't do it, you provide a false sense of love to your spouse or your partner. Because when you don't love yourself authentically from the core, you don't know how to love them in the way that they deserve. You're not able to give it or receive it to the level that you should be able and to be deserving of it. It's important. And I know some people struggle with the fact that, hey, how do I love myself? How do I learn on this journey to really embrace unapologetically everything about me? I'm going to tell you how. Go visit Coach Nicole-Renee on YouTube. There is a video called What is Love, Part 1. It will start you on your journey to loving self. It'll give you some tools that can outline your journey to give you a nice start. But you got to put in the work. You got to be willing to put in the work. You're worth it. In the meantime, tap into your resources. Establish a relationship with God. Prayer and devotion is very important. Get a therapist. Get a coach. Start meditating every day. Speak words of affirmation over your life. You got to get an exercise regimen. You got to keep that body going. Feed it right. You only get 1 temple, honey. You got to do right by it. Do right by what God gave you, right? There's a quote floating around social media, and I love it. So I'm going to read it to you. It says, if you do not address your childhood traumas, your romantic relationships will. Baby, that is truth 100. It is truth 100. It will show up. It will show up. You must heal from your wounds. You have to. Because they are responsible for the negative self-image that you have when you don't address the issues. You got to address your mess. You must deal with it. Get the help that you need to navigate through this thing called life. You deserve it. Don't you want to live your best life? Life beyond limits? The reward, honey, is far that you can even imagine. Stop living a mediocre life. You deserve so much better. And when you spend enough time with you, honey, you can see a joker coming a mile a minute. And you can definitely say, pause. You got to know you. Because then you won't settle. You won't compromise your standards. You deserve the best that life has to offer. The best that life has to offer. I hope you got something out of this segment of COVID, couples corruption, and really deal with the depth of what you need to deal with yourself. I'm sure many of you are tired of failed relationships, but it's mainly because you haven't put in the work. Because if you did, you would identify somebody that's not ready, and you wouldn't engage in unfulfilled, unhealthy relationships. But until next time, love God, love self, and love others. Thanks again for tuning in.